Hello, I'm having trouble sleeping, and welcome to Having Trouble Sleeping. This podcast is intended for those of you like myself, those who have trouble falling asleep when you very much wish you could. I know your plight all too well, so please, allow me to aid in your endeavor. If, during this episode, you fall asleep, excellent. If I'm simply a soft voice to soothe your addled mind, to distract your anxious thoughts, to bring comfort where it is needed, that is excellent as well. I hope that by writing and narrating these episodes, I may be a thorn in the side of that great beast, insomnia, that I may assist our great ally sleep, and maybe, just maybe, invite dreams to bless our slumber. Settle in now, take a deep breath, and relax your body. Go on. Tonight, I am the narrator, and we are observing a dragon. Now, you may be thinking of a ginormous beast intent on ravaging villages and hoarding treasure. That is not the sort of dragon Lysander is. Lysander is a whimsy dragon, with blue scales, ivory horns, and brown eyes. If you are not familiar with whimsy dragons, my goodness, have you been missing out. They are the most delightful creatures, not a care in the world as they bumble along through life. Barely larger than your average dog, whimsy dragons are the most frivolous of intelligent life, hardly a serious bone in their bodies. They commonly reside in forests, where they build homes which mimic those that a human might build. Not quite the dens and caves you might be expecting, but instead short cabins and huts, quaint as the little dragons themselves. This particular day, Lysander was on a quest. He ambled through the autumn forest wearing his favorite scarf. Said scarf had been acquired from a human woman whom he had befriended on one of his sojourns away from home. It was knit especially for him, and the colors of the yarn were yellow and orange, complementing his handsome blue scales. He wore it with pride whenever the weather permitted, careful as can be so as to not allow it to snag on any branches. His current objective was one of great import, relatively speaking, of course, for he was a whimsy dragon after all. He was on his way to the nearby town in order to meet with his friend Gale. Now, one sure way to earn the loyalty and regard of a whimsy dragon was to make them laugh, which was generally a simple task, as they were easily amused. Gale was quite adept at entertaining not just the little dragons, but people in general. The stout man was a jester, a clown, a fool, a comedian. His passion in life was to bring joy and laughter to others. Knowing this, you might see why he was so popular with whimsy dragons, and why Lysander made it a priority to set aside time for him. Arriving in town, Lysander spotted an elderly woman with a hunched posture and a pink shawl. He bounded toward her, calling out her name with an enthusiasm that caused others to look over. She turned and smiled warmly at the dragon, and as he arrived in front of her, she reached out one of her aged hands and caressed his cheek. This was Tildy, a kindly woman who had often cared for Lysander when he was young. Though he was an adult now, his joy at seeing Tildy was nothing short of delightfully childlike. The old woman inquired as to what Lysander was going to be doing in town, and he explained to her his plans to help Gale. When she asked what it was that the jester needed help with, Lysander's eyes stared blankly for a moment. He admitted that he had no idea what Gale needed help with, which earned a chuckle from Tildy. She patted him on the head, which broke his puzzlement and set his mood back to his default joyousness. Before she sent him on his way, she reached into an inner pocket of her clothing and withdrew a paper-wrapped sweet. Lysander sat on his haunches and accepted the treat, eagerly unwrapping it and indulging in the dried strawberry. It stuck to his teeth as he chewed, the sweetness bringing even more happiness to the small dragon. As he gave his thanks and appreciation for Tildy, she chuckled and patted him on the head once more. After leaving Tildy to resume her business, Lysander went about his own, heading for the town square where he always met his frivolous friend. Sure enough, upon arriving at the square, Lysander spotted Gale sitting on a wooden crate, idly shuffling a deck of cards. As Gale's eyes caught sight of his draconic friend, he sprang up with a greeting, exaggerating a bow and doffing his maroon cap to his most honorable partner in mischief. Lysander reciprocated the bow with a laugh, already beaming without knowing quite what they would be getting up to this day. He asked what his friend needed assistance with, and Gale squatted and put an arm around Lysander's neck as he explained in a conspiratorial manner. The jester was working on a new element to his show, and he needed to test a few tricks before he performed them in front of a paying crowd. The most important thing regarding these tricks, however, was that no one knew how they were done, otherwise they would lose their charm. The description had Lysander restless with excitement, eager to assist with the new act. After confirming that his friend was ready to begin, Gale stepped back from the dragon, facing him. He explained that for this trick, it was important that he was unable to reach the participant, demonstrating by showing that he was a little more than an arm's length away. He then asked if Lysander could see the cards clearly from the short distance. Once the dragon nodded, Gale told Lysander that his task was to see one card as he riffled through the deck and keep it in his mind. Holding the deck up flat for the dragon, he drew his finger along the edge of the cards, revealing each for the briefest moment. Once he was done, he asked his friend if he had picked out a card. Lysander shook his head, blinking a few times. Gale laughed and offered to do it once more, but a bit slower. This time, Lysander focused intently, his eyes locked onto the cards. As the jester riffled through the deck once more, the dragon made sure to spot a card in the blur of numbers and faces. When he finished and asked him if he had seen a card this time, Lysander nodded eagerly. Gale instructed his friend to now hold out one of his paws. He sat and did so, holding out a single paw. The stout entertainer explained that now he was going to command one of the cards to teleport out of the deck and into Lysander's paw, and that card would be the very same one that he had spotted out of the entire deck. Concentration was key to this trick working, though, and so Gale closed his eyes and was silent as his brow knit together. A moment later, a smile came over his face, opening his eyes with a triumphant declaration of, "Behold!" The dragon's paw was empty. As the jester saw this, his countenance fell for only a flash, and then he laughed. It seemed he had not been concentrating hard enough, as the card had missed its mark. Instead of alighting in the dragon's paw, it had found its way into his scarf. Lysander reached back and felt around his neck, and sure enough, he retrieved a single card. A mere glance at it was enough to get the little dragon to gasp, an excited squeak escaping him as he looked from the card to his smug friend and back again. After confirming that it was the card that he had seen, he was quick to ask how it had happened, to which his friend replied that a trick loses its joy if its methods are revealed. Lysander was content with the answer, and focused his excitement on helping with the next trick. Gale stepped closer, and with a showman's flourish, he fanned out the deck of cards. He instructed the small dragon to, rather than taking one of the cards, imagine taking one of the cards. Lysander eagerly complied, nodding his head in excitement as he imagined a card. The jester then instructed him to imagine not showing the face of the card to anyone, and to imagine placing the card back into the deck. Lysander once again nodded as the scene formed in his mind. Gale then shuffled the deck several times, explaining to his friend that when the cards were properly mixed up, he was going to do the impossible. Not only was he going to find the card that his friend had imagined taking, but he was going to separate it from the deck entirely. With Lysander paying close attention, a card sprang forth from the deck, caught by his friend and held up to reveal the face. With the same smugness as the first trick, Gale asked if it was the card that his friend had imagined taking. A shake of the head from the dragon replaced the jester's smile with a momentary confusion, which he played off with a laugh, explaining that he must have gotten the cards mixed up. Returning the false card to the deck, another sprang forth, and once more he caught it and held it up to his friend. Another shake of Lysander's head brought the confusion back to stay. He returned the card to the deck, his trick having failed. He muttered to himself that he would have to practice that one more, and then asked out of curiosity what the card Lysander had imagined had been. When he stated the card, Gale turned the cards face up and sifted through them. As he reached the end of them, his confused expression was renewed. He told his friend that he could not find the card anywhere in the deck, and then handed the cards to the dragon for a second inspection. Once Lysander had gone through and confirmed that the card was absent, Gale stood there thinking for a moment. As he lifted his cap and scratched his head, a single card fell down from it. It landed on the ground face up, and as the two looked at it, Lysander gasped and Gale laughed. It seemed that he had done too good of a job at separating the card from the deck, for the card that had fallen out had been the exact card the dragon had imagined. Lysander jittered with excitement as he eagerly returned the cards to his friend, begging him for the next trick. Gale accepted the deck and retrieved the card from the ground, wiping it clean before returning it to the stack. He told his friend that he had one more trick that he wanted to practice, but for this one, he would need Lysander to do some of the magic. Gale asked him if he had any magic of his own, to which the little dragon shook his head. With dismissive reassurance, the stout jester said that he would let Lysander borrow some of his. He reached out a hand and tapped the dragon on the snout, and afterward asked his scaled friend if he felt the magic now. With uncertain enthusiasm, Lysander closed his eyes and concentrated, and a moment later opened them with a shake of his head. Gale chuckled and explained that borrowed magic was sometimes hard to feel. He held up the deck once more, fanning it out and instructing his friend to point to a card. Lysander did so, and Gale showed him the face, and then told him to take it and hold it facing down in his paw. After a few shuffles of the deck, Gale fanned them out once more and asked Lysander to point to a second card. When one was picked out, he once again showed it to the dragon, but this time he put it back in the deck and then put the cards away in his pocket. For this trick, Gale explained that he was going to need Lysander to concentrate and use the magic that he had been lent, for it would only last for a short while. He was going to turn the first card into the second card, even as it was in his friend's paw. Inviting him to concentrate with him, both were silent for a moment. With squinted eyes, the two focused completely on the card in Lysander's paw. Following the brief silence, Gale proclaimed that it had been done, and to turn the card over. It was blank. Not only was it not the second card, but it had nothing on the face at all. Gale's brow knit together, muttering under his breath that this hadn't ever happened before. He asked for the card, and then gave it a vigorous shake. The blank card was soon back to its initial appearance, much to Lysander's delight. Gale returned it to his friend, and once more instructed him to hold it face down, but to concentrate a little bit less this time. The Whimsy dragon nodded dutifully, and once more the two of them endeavored to change the card. After a prolonged moment of silence and focus, Gale announced again that it had been done, and instructed Lysander to flip over the card. To the disappointment of both of them, it remained the unchanged first card. Gale huffed in frustration, accepting the card back from his friend and holding it up to explain that the cards were being uncooperative today. Regrettably, Gale would have to resort to using the snap. Before Lysander could ask what the snap was, Gale snapped his fingers and the first card instantly transformed into the second card. The little dragon gasped, his eyes once more wide with awe. He was very much a fan of the snap, and giddily asked his friend to do it again. Gale agreed to, holding up the second card this time, and then with another crisp snap, it was back to the first card, right before the little dragon's eyes. Lysander was at a loss for words, just as odd as the first time, a look of wonder to pair with his huge smile. Gale humbly accepted the praise Lysander heaped upon him as he put the cards away, doffing his cap with a bow. Concluding his demonstration, Gale inquired as to if Lysander had plans for the rest of the day, for the sun was not even yet at its apex. Lysander thought for a moment, and then shook his head, for Whimsy dragons were not prone to making plans themselves, With an open schedule, Gale proposed that he and Lysander adjourn to the bakery, his treat. The little dragon was delighted to accept, standing upon restless paws with visible eagerness to accompany his friend. The two strode along the cobbled streets of the town, passing friends and fans of Gale's performances along the way. Before long, they arrived at A2WS bakery, one of the nicer buildings in the area. As they stepped inside, the duo were greeted by a familiar woman behind the counter. Ale was the sort of person whose mere appearance lended some credibility for her passion for food. Her warm smile was framed by her pudgy cheeks and prominent double chin, and though she was even shorter than Gale, she was twice his width. The jolly dark-skinned woman continued what she had been doing as the two approached, moving orange cakes from a pan to her display. As Lysander and Gale reached the counter, they exchanged friendly small talk with her, and then Lysander asked what her oldest unsold treat was. Ale's chuckle shook her shoulders, ever so amused by the little dragon's unusual preference. Initially, she had suspected that Lysander was merely being charitable, wanting to purchase something that she would have had to give away anyway. The truth was, however, that the little dragon simply liked the drier, firmer treats. Lysander happily selected a neglected sugar bun, while Gale opted for one of the freshly baked orange cakes. After Gale paid and placed the bun atop his friend's head, the two of them claimed a nearby table. Lysander's steady balance ensured that his treat arrived safely, and as he sat, he reached up to retrieve it. Though it was far from the most exciting treat available at A2WS, he was nonetheless beyond content with it, savoring each dry bite of the sweet bread. Gale likewise took his time enjoying his treat. Ale approached their table, bringing a sandwich, a pitcher of sweet water, and 3 glasses. It was as good a time as any for a midday meal, or a second midday meal in Ale's case. As she claimed a chair of her own, she poured 3 glasses, nodding her acceptance of her friend's gratitude. The drink was especially welcome by the small dragon, whose chosen treat practically necessitated such a pairing. As Lysander sipped, Ale asked Gale of a rumor she had caught wind of, something regarding a traveling musician coming to town. Gale was himself a showman, and so she figured he might know. The jester had indeed received similar tellings, and as he told Ale what he knew, she ate her sandwich. Music was not an uncommon hobby, but it was an uncommon profession. One skilled enough to live off of the payment rent for the privilege of hearing their performances was rumor-worthy indeed. Gale had discovered an even more fascinating element of the rumor, though. It was said that the musician was not a human, but a whimsy dragon. Lysander perked up, leaning in as Ale listened with raised brows. Gale struggled to recall the name that he had heard in passing. Struger, Starge, Stagris. Something similar, but none of them sounded right to his ears. The traveling performer was becoming quite popular with showgoers, and it hadn't been the first time Gale had heard of the musical dragon, usually overhearing talk of him or her from his own audiences after performances. Lysander inquired as to the color of the dragon's scales, to which Gale responded that he had never been told. Returning to nibbling on the remainder of his sugar bun, Lysander searched through his memory of his fellow dragons in hopes that the musician was a known friend. Ale asked Gale further questions, but each was answered in an unsatisfying way, as the jester hardly knew more than what he had already volunteered. He did note that the dragon was said to be an expert with multiple instruments, and not simply a specialist. The thought of such virtuosity distracted Lysander from his search, imagining now a whimsy dragon playing several instruments at once. Ale looked over at Lysander and asked him if he knew any whimsy dragons that played music. He nodded, thinking immediately of Palda, whom lived a short journey north of his hut and played the flute. Gale shook his head at the name, certain it hadn't been that. As Lysander thought further, he vaguely recalled seeing a small harp in his friend Norton's house when he visited. Gale once again shook his head, reiterating that he was sure it started with a st sound, and had a j sound somewhere. Lysander shrugged, no names coming to mind. As Ale finished her sandwich, she sipped her own glass of sweet water. Gale inquired as to any new recipes she was working on. Setting her glass down, Alay regaled the two of them with her experiments. Nothing fit for serving had come of it yet, but she was determined to find a way for peaches and apples to pair together in a way that neither overpowered the other. So far, the apples were too mild, but she had enough ideas that the spark of invention was still bright. Lysander suggested that she add a third fruit to the recipe that would act as the undertone for the treat, allowing the apples and peaches to shine. The thought gave Alay pause. Her eyes flitted around as she contemplated the new idea, her two friends watching in silent anticipation for her to catch the revelation she was chasing. She opened her mouth, then closed it, one brow raising as she untangled the thought. At last, she looked at Lysander and smiled, telling him that he had just given her an idea she was confident would work. The little dragon beamed, delighted as can be to be of help. Gale asked what new ideas she was going to try, but Alay stood up from the table. She had happened upon a breakthrough, and she was eager to experiment with it. She said that she would tell them the recipe once she figured it out, but that for now, she needed to go try the new idea. Her friends encouraged her, bidding her a farewell as she collected the empty glasses and pitcher and waddled off toward her kitchen. Gale stood and stretched, and Lysander did likewise. It was time for them to part ways, as the jester needed to practice his act. The little dragon adjusted his scarf and thanked his friend for both the treat and the preview of the magic tricks. As he padded away in the direction of the woods, he wore a smile on his face, a cheerful little whimsy dragon without a care in the world and much to look forward to. Gale's new show, the traveling musician, and Alay's new recipe were all eagerly anticipated. As for the rest of the day, it would be spent precisely in the manner that most days were spent by whimsy dragons, being guided by the whim of the moment and enjoying life's simple delights